Thank you for accepting our invitation to appear on this very special edition of Benchmark, Mr. Veeratunga. Just as an opening question, where is Sri Lanka at right now in both the context of global and local events?
Despite financial crisis, food crisis, political turmoil all over the world, my strong belief is that, and I think that of many people, is that Sri Lanka stands at a very strong point today. Reasons being, we have good political stability after many, many years. 30 years of a war. This is the only country which was able to defeat terrorism. That is a very strong point where Sri Lanka stands at a very strong position in the world. Many global interviews that I have seen very recently in Fox News, Sri Lanka is depicted as one of the strongest economies, a place to visit. So I think we are doing extremely well. But when the world starts turning around in different angles, Sri Lanka needs to be sensitive to that. And I think that sensitivity is very well enshrined in the political minds of the heads of the government, head of state, particularly His Excellency the President. He's a very politically savvy person. Peace is very strong, and therefore we believe we are at a very good point to take off.
Speaking of the world turning around in different angles, as you said, there have been a lot of events and uprisings in the Middle East, in the Arab world, and implications, especially for oil importing nations such as ours, is going to be quite scalable. Should there be a threat to oil supplies, are we as a nation prepared at this point of time to manage an eventuality such as this, even if it's in the short term?
We are. Take the food crisis back maybe about 3 years back. A lot of people thought this country, people would go hungry. Not a single person that I don't think there is any report of any person going hungry. There were countries where there were food riots. Why? Because we were prepared. There was a very clear plan the government has implemented. Even if there is an oil crisis, well, if the whole world is going through oil crisis, Sri Lanka would also be subject to part of it. But I think we are generally ready for it. We would be able to adjust. Because you see, the non-alignment policy of Sri Lanka has allowed it to be friends of many, many countries. Even in the case of India and China, well, they are two different types, but we are friendly with both countries. So we were able to position ourselves, align ourselves in the world scene to make sure that we get the best.
Still on the same subject, Mr. Veeratunga, there are sections of the media and also the opposition who say that there are similarities between what was happening in Egypt before the revolution and the local political scene. Now, what is your reaction to these views?
What else can the opposition say? What else can the opposition say than to rely on what is happening elsewhere in the world, but forgetting the fact that we are not Egypt. We are not Tunisia either. We are not Libya. So we are not Iran. We are Sri Lanka. You see, a lot of people thought that we would not be able to defeat terrorism. Tell me one country. There is not a single country in the world which defeated terrorism. So we have done the impossible. Having done the impossible, my belief is that we are different to all these nations. The present government, particularly His Excellency the President, has had a fantastic mandate from the people. 58% in his second term is a landmark victory. If someone says that it is not a landmark victory, I think he needs to really start rethinking of his thoughts. So my way of looking at it is, we are a democratic nation, the oldest democracy in Asia. We have withstood many, many conflicts. We have withstood the worst conflict in our history. So having withstood all that, we are different. Therefore, these are not parallels. These are not comparables either. So I think what happens in Egypt, what happens in Tunisia, you can't apply it here. All of us stand for democracy. All of us stand for a strong democracy. So I don't think there is any way that events that had taken place in Egypt, Tunisia, or any of the Middle East countries would ever be here, as long as the government is, as I said earlier, sensitive to the needs of the people. And I must tell you, being a responsible officer in the government, that we are sensitive to the needs of the people.
Some of our diplomatic forays in the recent past have left something to be desired, Mr. Veeratunga. For example, the so-called Oxford debacle of last year could have been averted and I think our president deserves better. Where does Sri Lanka's diplomatic ties and diplomatic matters rest at this point of time?
I was the one who received the invitation letter on behalf of His Excellency. It came from the Secretary of the Oxford Union, the main student body. The man, I think, is James Kingston, who wrote to us. He says, well, you know, you are invited. In fact, he was to be given an award at this speech for eliminating terrorism. It's a 2-page letter where it's all, you know, fantastic things about Sri Lanka. And they wanted to hear how His Excellency and Sri Lanka eliminated terrorism. Unfortunately, I think what the world missed, in my understanding, was what he was going to say about his future plans to a global community. How would Sri Lanka go ahead? How would Sri Lanka do its reconciliation process? How would Sri Lanka become a, you know, force in the world? Until we went to London, the invitation stood. So it was in the hotel that he received the information that this event is cancelled. So who is wrong? It's not the diplomatic community. I think what the advice the High Commissioner gave was perfectly right. He said there can be protests, and His Excellency knew this. My way of looking at it is, he is a very strong leader, and a leader who loves to take challenges. On the one hand, if he didn't go, what people would have thought? Well, the invitation stood, so he couldn't have said, sorry, I can't come. So he has to go, having accepted it. On the second, on the other side, he can't go there and say, no, I'm not going to the Oxford, even though they have a protest. It was the Oxford Union which retracted the invitation.
There is also a lot of interest in how we are dealing with India and China, and also given their interest in Sri Lanka's post-war development arena. How are others, especially the West, actually viewing what's happening on the ground here? Is this to be expected, and can we do anything about it?
The resistance of the West is to be expected, no doubt about it. You see, they are also fearful of China, because China is emerging so fast as a nation that can stand on its own. Some of the investments in these Western countries have come from China. If China withdraws, their economies will collapse and crumble. So they have a reason to worry about China's ascendancy, probably as the world's most influential economic power. I believe that's the way they are going. China has been a long-standing friend. We still have our only memorial, which I think would be can be a world-class convention center. The BMICH was a gift from China. What should the Sri Lanka's leadership be doing? Sri Lanka's leadership should be looking at our friends in the world and not be aligned to one section. Okay, say that we are aligned to the West. What would the West do? West would want us to do this and that, and they're not going to give the kind of aid that China has given. They're not going to give us a harbor. They're not going to give us an airport. They're not going to give us a performing arts theater. They have not. The history is that. So China's relationship with Sri Lanka is unique. But let me also tell you that Sri Lanka's relationship with India is also unique. If I may quote from an interview which His Excellency did with NDTV, Walk the Talk, with Shekhar Gupta. He said, India is my relation, China is my friend. So, I mean, that's a very, very succinct, very clear way as to how we look at these two countries. We want both. We will make sure that we have our relationship going.
You are at the forefront of efforts to transform this country, especially in the ICT area, to make it ICT enabled and ICT empowered. And in fact, we've been told that there's an extensive study that has been undertaken to examine our state-owned enterprises and how they will actually benefit from these efforts. Can you just elaborate a little bit on this?
If we do not keep pace with the developments, ICT developments in the world, we will be a country which will lag behind. This is one reason why the present government, I must pay a compliment to the leadership. His Excellency the President himself took this on, and in 2009, if you remember, he declared 2009 as the year of English and IT. He gave a huge impetus. Then he went and instituted this Nanasalas, the rural telecenters, which in turn gave us a high ICT literacy from about 5% in 2004 to 30% as at now. I think the present census might give us a better figure. The whole idea was, if the government were to keep pace with the economic development that was envisaged in Mahinda Chintana, there no other way than to use ICT, because processes must be speedier. The outcomes, the public service delivery must be very efficient and effective. If ICT is taken out of all that, you will see a lethargic bureaucracy. If at my age I can use IT, I think young people must. But I must tell you, the young recruits into the public service, particularly to the Sri Lanka Administrative Service, they come armed with IT. I see these people bringing laptops and all that, and I feel so good about it. ICT is a must, and we will ensure that the re-engineering government program of the ICTA, of which I happen to be its first director way back in the 2003 or 2004, I would like to see ICT being adopted as a main tool. It's a tool which has to be used. So we are well on the way to becoming a IT literate nation.
Mr. Veeratunga, ICT enablement and ICT empowerment is fine, but there are some inherent risks involved, especially where human resources are concerned, and given that you are putting ICT into the public sector. For example, ICT enablement could also mean less people, more automation. Wouldn't this then come across as a risk where employment is concerned, where you may have problems with unions, and even the likes of the JVP actually being a spoke in the wheel? How are we going to deal with this?
More automation, less people is a myth in my understanding. Certainly you need only less people, but the opportunities that are created and generated will be able to absorb number of people, because so many ancillary activities are necessary. You see, when IT is introduced, you also have people to service, to sell, so many things. Nowhere in the world has this really happened, you know. So I think this myth must never be taken forward, and must not let people think that if you use ICT, people will be thrown out of the jobs. People will become more productive. Nation needs productivity. So once you become productive, there are other avenues to which people can be absorbed. That is the articulation of the government which needs to be refined. Meaning, how do we generate employment opportunities for people? Introduction of ICT is a very good thing.
Sports tourism, Mr. Veeratunga, was definitely a key driver that was cited in the President's 2011 budget agenda. And of course, we've been successful somewhat. We are now co-hosting the ICC Cricket World Cup. We're also pitching to host the 2018 Commonwealth Games. We have seen some very high-class stadiums being put up, which has impressed cricketers from around the world. Plans to build a Formula One track, and also a mini city with the land to be reclaimed from the sea adjoining the Colombo port. And also golf is taking a precedence. What would you say to critics in this country who say that this country cannot afford to go this far? Do they lack vision?
Go back to the time when the critics said we cannot defeat LTTE. We did it, right? More difficult. Sports tourism, if you take in the order of importance or hierarchy, if you give 10 to beating the LTTE, defeating terrorism, sports tourism is at 2 or 3, very doable, and we did it. He said that, His Excellency the President said that in his 2010 budget for 2011, immediately you see Surya Vava. Now, if you listen to the commentators, Ian Botham and Ramesh Raja, these are very well accepted commentators. they don't need to be palavering the Sri Lankans. Ian Botham said, this is a fantastic place. If I am allowed to come here and design a golf course, I will do that. I hope they will have a golf course. That is what he said. Ramesh Raja says, in this jungle, and he shows this elephant who was hovering around. He says, in this jungle, you have created this first class stadium, which is not second to anywhere else in the world. So we have immediately done it. Now, bidding for 2018 is a very important thing, because we will have to gear ourselves, which means we'll develop the roads, we'll develop the hotels, there will be employment for the people, there will be many other investors coming in. The moment you are a venue, a global venue, there's so much of attention. So sports tourism is certainly going to thrive in Sri Lanka. Now, this Formula One, it's a doable thing, and it will be done.